Good morning, everyone. It's 9 a.m., time for our Bible class. So good to see so many visiting with us this morning. So wonderful to have our college students back, and some are beginning their freshman year. And so it's wonderful to have each and every one, some visiting for the very first time, and we thank you for being here. We count you as our honored guest, and we hope you feel a warm and friendly, loving welcome from the members here, as we desire you to. We're studying through the story of the Bible. It's a 3.5 or so year study. And so we're in Genesis, and we're in Genesis chapter 11 and 12, or at least a portion of 12 today. And if you'll have your Bibles open there, please. You see where we're highlighted there on the screen, lesson 7, the patriarchs, and you think about the 17 periods of Bible history, and we've already gone through the period of before the flood, and the scattering of the people. So we're already moving on to a fourth period of the Bible now, the patriarchs. And of course that begins with Abram, or Abraham as he becomes known. And so the generations of Terah there at the end of chapter 11, and then moving into Canaan with Abram and his family, his household. And so you see the text that we're going to be focused on this morning, end of chapter 11, and then kind of the first part of chapter 12. To supplement our study, of course, we're using the Bob and Sandra Waldron workbooks, but when I say workbooks, they're very thick workbooks that cover this material and have a lot of good added information to benefit us as we study through them. All right. So again, God's call to Abraham is kind of what we're focused on. I'd like to read the text together here in Genesis 11 and 12. Not many verses that we'll be focused on together this morning. But again, Genesis 11 in your Bibles, 27 through 32. And then we'll go into chapter 12 and read 1 through 9. And so let me start over here with you, Gil. And let's take 2 verses here, 27 to 32. And then when we get to chapter 12, we'll take 3 verses each. So 27 and 28. Maddie, you good with reading? What'd you say? Are you saying you're blind this morning? All right, we won't laugh. 29 and 30 then, if you can do that, Maddie. 31 and 32, Sam. Camden, if you'll do 1 through 3. Chloe, you're good? If you'll do 4 through 6. Jeb, 7 through 9, please.
All right, good. This is the genealogy of Terah. Terah begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Haran begot Lot, and Haran died before his father Terah in his native land, in Ur of the Chaldeans.
Then Abram and Nor took wives. The name of Abraham's wife was Sarai, and the name of Norah's wife, Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Malcah, and the father of Iscah. But I didn't know that. I'm so sorry. But Sarai was barren, and she had no child.
Terah took Abram, his son, and Lot, the son of Haran, his grandson, and Sarai, his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went out together from Ur of the Chaldeans in order to enter the land of Canaan. And they went as far as Haran and settled there. The days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran.
Now the Lord had said to Abram, Get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house, to the land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you, and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed.
So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Then Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people whom they had acquired in Haran, and they departed to go to the land of Canaan. So they came to the land of Canaan. Abram passed through the land to the place of Shechem, as far as the terebinth tree of Moreh, and the Canaanites were then in the land.
The Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your descendants I will give this land." So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. Then he proceeded from there to the mountain on the east of Bethel, and pitched his tent, with Bethel to the west and Ai to the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord, and called upon the name of the Lord. Abram journeyed on, continuing toward the Negev.
All right, appreciate it. So, those of you who have the Waldron book on page 49, the first paragraph says, as Moses, of course Moses, the author of these first 5 books, right, of the Bible, but it says as Moses moves from one division of his inspired history to another, he often uses the expression, now these are the generations of. And he cites different Genesis references, chapter 5, verse 1, 6, verse 9, 11, verse 10, so on. But he says, as we come to 11, 27 through 32, Moses is ready to narrow the line of Noah through Shem, even further to bring us to the lineage of one man, Abraham. So though he labels this little section, now these are the generations of Terah, or as my New King James reads in verse 27, now, this is the genealogy of Terah. Almost immediately, what does he do? He singles out one of Terah's sons, Abram, in order to follow the story of his life. Therefore, we are placing this short section here in our outline as a prologue to the story of Abraham. Just how important is this Bible character, Abraham? Extremely, right? In Romans chapter 4, if you hold your place here in Genesis 11 and 12, if you grab Romans 4 with me real quick, I want you to notice something the Apostle Paul says about this man in the New Testament. And of course, keep in mind, we're not in the period of the patriarchs. We're not in the Mosaical dispensation. We're in the Christian dispensation. We're in the period of the church has been established, the gospel's being preached to one and all. And here's Paul writing to the saints in Rome, and who's he bring up to them? And of course, the Christians of Rome would be both Jews and Gentiles, and I would say primarily Gentiles, but a mix of Jews and Gentiles. But who's he bring up? He brings up Abraham. And here in Romans chapter 4, notice in verse 11, speaking of Abraham, and he received the sign of circumcision, Romans 4:11, a seal of the righteousness of the faith which he had while still uncircumcised, that he might, notice, that he might be the father of all those who believe, though they are uncircumcised, that righteousness might be imputed to them also. Notice verse 12, and the father of circumcision to those who not only are of the circumcision, but who also walk in the steps of the faith which our father Abraham had while still uncircumcised. So here the inspired Apostle Paul in the New Testament refers to this Bible character that we've just recently been introduced to in Genesis as the father of all those who believe, and how we are to walk in the steps of the faith which our father Abraham had. And there'll be some other passages we'll connect, but obviously Jesus during his earthly ministry made reference to Abraham quite a bit in his teaching. But also the New Testament writers do as well, following the gospel accounts. He is a major Bible character that we are to be connected to. He's a great example, Paul says, of faith. Walk in his steps of faith. And he's the father of all who believe. So Scripture certainly hold up this man for emulation, for imitation in all those good ways that he did and walked in his life. So question 1, what do we learn from the following passages of where Abram, and I'll go back and forth a little bit with Abram and Abraham. Eventually we'll get to where it's just Abraham. But what do we learn from the following passages of where Abram dwelt when the Lord first appeared to him and called him to depart from his country and family? So here in Genesis 12:1, we just read it a moment ago together, right? Now the Lord had said to Abram, get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house to a land I will show you. But if you go to chapter 15 of Genesis, verse 7, what does the Lord say to him there? Who'd like to read that? Aiden or Alex? Either one of you? Genesis 15, verse 7.
He said to them, I am the Lord who brought you out from Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to possess.
Okay, so where was he born, as far as we know? Where did he grow up? Ur of the Chaldeans. Later, they travel, we know, to Haran. We'll look at that on a map here later. And then eventually make their way down to the land of Canaan, right? But here it's stated very plainly by God to Abram in Genesis 15, verse 7, as Alex just read for us, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur the Chaldeans to give you this land to inherit. Did you raise your hand, Erica? Or I just maybe saw a movement. Okay. And then in chapter 24, verse 7, Will, you good with reading that? Thank you.
Genesis 24:7.
Yes, please.
The Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house, from the land of my kindred, and who spoke to me and swore to me, to your offspring I will give this land. He will send his angel before you, and you shall take a wife for my son from there.
Okay, so here Abraham speaking in his old age to provide a wife for his son Isaac, but he says, the Lord God of heaven, he took me from my father's house, from the land of my family, or from my native land. And then you look at the New Testament in Acts 7 when Stephen, right, one of the 7 that have been chosen, but preaching boldly before the Sanhedrin Council. And here in Acts chapter 7, in verses 2 through 4, we want to notice that. All right. And so, Mark, can you get verse 2, Brent 3 and 4, please?
Acts 7.
Yeah, if you'll just take verse 2 of Acts 7, and then Brent's going to grab 3 and 4 for it.
And Stephen said, Brothers and fathers, hear me. The God of glory appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he lived in Haran.
And said to him, Go out from your land and from your kindred and go into the land that I will show you. Then he went out from the land of the Chaldeans and lived in Haran. And after his father died, God removed him from there into this land in which you are now living.
All right, so Stephen clearly states it as well, as he is filled and inspired, guided here by, we know, the Holy Spirit. And so this wasn't just conjecture on his part. This was not his opinion. He says, the God of glory appeared to our father Abraham when he was where? When he was in Mesopotamia before he dwelt in Haran. So we put all these scriptures together from the Old Testament, New Testament, and we know the answer about where Abraham dwelt when the Lord first appeared to him. It was in Mesopotamia. It was in Ur of the Chaldeans. And that God, in the New King James Version, it says God moved him to Canaan. God moved him to Canaan after his father died, and that, of course, that was in Haran later. Okay. All right. Any additional comments here, Erica? See, I knew you had something. Go ahead.
Ken and I were talking about this yesterday afternoon a little bit, and it's really interesting because last week in the verses here that we read in 11, it actually says in 11:31 that Terah took his family with the goal in mind of going to Canaan, but they end up at Haran. So it's just really interesting. If you just took that verse, you could say, well, you know, how did Terah know to go to Canaan? But throughout God's word, it's just really neat to see that we learned that Terah was an idolatrous worshiper, but somehow, apparently through Abraham, with the knowledge of God, that he too wanted to go on this journey. And so you could see the faith that Abraham's whole family had, which I thought was pretty interesting, that the scripture just brings a little bit more light to that.
Yeah, good point. Appreciate it. One of the benefits of working at the fair together, right? When no one's there to talk to, we can talk and visit with our brethren and have good spiritual conversations, all right? Anyone else? Okay. So question 2, how did Abraham demonstrate faith when he departed from his own country, referencing there in the New Testament, Hebrews 11. And then how do we reconcile that he did not know where he was going with Genesis 11:31 and 12:5 that states his family went out to go to the land of Canaan. Okay. So first of all, focus on that Hebrews 11:8 passage. What do we read there? Let's come up to Todd. If you can read that for us, please.
By faith, Abraham, when he was called, obeyed by going out to a place which he was to receive for an inheritance, and he went out not knowing where he was going.
Okay. So obviously Hebrews 11, I think everyone here is probably very familiar with that chapter, right? Heroes of faith. And he begins with Abel and then Enoch and then Noah and then gets down to Abraham after that. And by faith, it says, Abraham obeyed. Is that what yours says, Todd? Yes. He obeyed when he was called to go out to a place which he would receive as inheritance. We know what that place would be, right? Canaan. But he went out, it says, not knowing where he was going. Well, first of all, that first part of verse 8, by faith, where does faith come from? So then faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God, right? Romans 10:17. We already, in the first question, talked about where did God first call him? So he heard the word of the Lord. He showed faith and trust and obeyed, but he went out not knowing where he was going. But when we go back to the text of Genesis 11:31, 12:5, it states his family went out to go to the land of Canaan. Sounds like he did know where he was going. So how do we reconcile those? Now, again, I know many of you present this morning don't have the maybe the added benefit of having the workbook to read through in preparation for the lesson, but the Waldrons provide some good thoughts. Those of you who have it, maybe look at page 54 in your workbook, and those who don't, if you can just listen as I share this, please. The Hebrew writer says that Abraham, this is on the left-hand column of page 54, the Hebrew writer says that Abraham went out not knowing where he was going, Hebrews 11:8, not knowing his final destination. In Genesis 11:31 and in 12:5, the text says the family went out to go into the land of Canaan. These passages leave us with two possibilities. One, the family left Ur, not knowing they were going to Canaan, and were told sometime afterward, in which case it was the historian's observation that they left Ur to go to Canaan, which would be Moses, the historian. And secondly, number two possibility, they knew they were going to Canaan, but did not know that it would be their final destination until Abram arrived in the land and was told by God that it would be the land God would give to his descendants. And then they conclude by saying the outcome is the same in either case. The immediate family lived in Ur. They left there at God's command, and their God-given destination was the land of Canaan. Okay? So whether the family left Ur and they didn't know they were going to Canaan, and then they were told sometime after that that's the final destination, or they knew they were going to Canaan but didn't know until they got there, this is the land that I'm going to give to your descendants. Okay. Additional thoughts on that? Okay, Sam?
When I read Hebrews 11:8, it sounds to me that it just means that Abraham just doesn't know where he's physically going, like he's geographically lost, and that he could be led by God wherever he's going. Like we read in the gospel accounts that Jesus was led by the Spirit to wander in the wilderness, and we know that God led people of Israel out of Egypt in a similar manner. I don't see why that wouldn't work for Abraham as well. Like if God told him to go somewhere, why he wouldn't guide him there to fulfill what he has promised him.
Okay. They didn't have a GPS? So it's just God directing him and leading him? Okay. Maybe possibly hadn't thought of it that way, but he acted, we know, in just complete trust and faith and confidence. God's called me to leave. I'm going out of my country, and maybe not knowing yet his final dwelling place, right? Erica?
So I have some confusion about this, and I don't know from what I'm reading in Scripture if I agree with that, with what Bob Waldron is saying. Because in 11:31, it says that Terah left. They left together from the Ur of the Chaldeans in order to enter the land of Canaan. So when I read 11:8, it actually doesn't say he doesn't know the destination he's going. It just says he doesn't know where he's. So I took that as he didn't know how to get there. That this was revealed. Terah left Ur in order to enter Canaan. That was the goal. So I kind of agree with Sam on that it was just maybe they knew where they were going, but they didn't know how to go there. They didn't know how to get there.
Okay. All right. Norm P.
So that just reading the Bible itself, it's a good translator for its own questions. You've got Terah who takes his family, and he's moving out, and he's heading towards them. But Terah only gets as far as Haran, and Terah settles there. So Terah's the one that takes Abram and all this stuff and goes out together. And in verse 1 of chapter 12, God tells Abram, you need to leave for your country, and you need to go out from your relative's house to a land which I will show you. So right there, in God's comments, God does not tell Abram his destination of where he's supposed to be going. Only that he's to go out and into a land that he's going to show him. And in verse 5, he takes and he heads out and he's heading out towards the land of Canaan. It's an obvious place to go, and we're not given whether or not God indicated a direction, but maybe because his father was going that direction, he's going to go that direction also. But the Bible farther down, just as Abram in verse 6 passes the land, as far as the side of Shechem to the oak of Moreh, now the Canaanite that was in the land then, the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your descendants I will give this land. So right then and there, Abram throughout that whole thing didn't know all the details. God just said, you need to go out from your relative's house. And well, he was heading to Canaan, I'll head that way too. Off he goes. There's no indication that Abram himself knew God's plans until God revealed it to him in verse 6. This is the land. Everything you just walked around and stuff, this is the land I will give your descendants. And so there's no reconciliation that needs to be done. It's just right there. You just keep reading the next verse. It tells you, now Abram knows, Canaan, the land in which he's in, this is now the land of promise.
All right.
Good thoughts? Anyone else want to chime in here? All right. Number 3, what promises did God make to Abraham in Genesis 12, verse 2, verse 3, verse 7? We read them earlier, and how was each promise fulfilled? So in chapter 12, verse 2, what's the promise? Yeah, So, yeah, the promise in verse 2 is, I will make you a great nation. And of course, how was that fulfilled eventually? That's going to be, the nation of Israel, the Jews, the Jewish nation, right? And then verse 3, what promise do we find there? It's the last part of the verse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. And so we have the spiritual blessing promise, right? So we have the land promise. I will make of you, I did what Todd did a second ago. We had the nation promise. I will make of you a great nation. Then we have the spiritual blessing promise through Abraham. All families of the earth would be blessed through his seed, right? And so what does Paul do with this in Galatians 3? Remember? He brings up this promise and the connection to Christ and to all who would be blessed through him then, and the salvation obviously that Christ brought to all humankind. But there in Galatians chapter 3 and in verse 16, it says, now to Abraham and his seed were the promises made. He does not say, and to seeds as of many, but as of one, and to your seed who is Christ. So Paul makes that abundantly clear, right? Galatians 3:16. There's another passage I'd like you to notice in Galatians 3, if you go ahead and take the time to turn over there, please. Now, we were talking about at the beginning of class just how important this Bible character, Abraham, truly is, but this is an interesting statement in Galatians 3 that I wanted us to notice. So, Galatians 3, and notice in verse 7 beginning, therefore know that only those who are of faith are sons of Abraham. Verse 8, and the scripture, foreseeing that God would justify the Gentiles by faith, preached the gospel to Abraham beforehand. How was the gospel, the good news of salvation, preached to Abraham beforehand? Saying, in you all the nations shall be blessed. So in other words, Genesis 12, verse 3, the gospel was being preached to Abraham beforehand, of not just the nation that would come from him, the Jews, the Israelites, but all nations, families of the earth would be blessed through him, through the seed which would come, Christ. So then those who are of faith are blessed with believing Abraham. That's just kind of neat. We think about the gospel not being preached till, well, Jesus came. And then sending out the apostles to go preach the gospel to all. Great. But the gospel was preached way back here in Genesis 12:3 initially to Abraham. Isn't that a neat thought? I thought it was. I wanted to connect that passage there with you. And then verse 7, what's the third promise? Genesis 12, verse 7. It's the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said to your descendants, I will give this land. And where is he? He's in the land of Canaan. Right? Go ahead, Todd.
And of course, the point that Paul makes over in Galatians 3 is that he's not speaking to seeds, but he spoke of a seed. So he argues from the singular, and he says that being Christ. But I notice, like in my margins, whenever it says seed, the margin will say descendants. Sometimes when it says descendants, like here in verse 7, in the margin it says seed. And so I think it's important to let the Bible be the commentary again.
Yeah.
And when it says that's a singular term, we should accept that. So I kind of want to mark out the word descendants in my Bible. That's plural, because he's pointing out this is always a reference to Christ.
Okay. So hopefully everybody heard Todd's comments, but just connecting back to what the inspired Apostle Paul wrote in Galatians 3:16, he didn't say to seed, but to your seed, and emphasizes the singular, not plurality. And so here in Genesis 12:7, when it says the Lord appeared to Abram and said to your descendants, plural, I will give this land. Literally, it's seed. Maybe you have that in your marginal references. I do for verse 7, literally seed. Is that what you're saying, Todd?
Yeah.
Okay, as one example of that.
Right. And the obvious place is going to be in chapter 22, verse 18. 22:18, I think, is what Paul's quoting, where he says, in your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. That one in my margin says descendants, but clearly it couldn't be descendants because Paul said it's seed singular. I guess back here in chapter 12, there's a double meaning, right? Because we know that all the people possess the land,
Right.
But in a spiritual sense, there may be a reference here to Christ as well.
Okay. So fast forward into Genesis 22:18, and more than likely what Paul is quoting or referencing in Galatians 3, Genesis 22:18, God said to Abraham, in your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed because you have obeyed my voice. All right. Appreciate that. So, how important are these three promises
To what we're going to be studying from going forward? Well, everything, right? The rest of the Bible story, or the rest of the Bible, is the story of the fulfilling of these three promises. So think about that. That's how important this text is in Genesis chapter 12. The rest of the Bible is the story of the fulfilling of those three promises, right? I'm going to make of you a great nation. I'm going to give this land to your descendants, and in your seed all families of the earth shall be blessed, looking to Christ, right? All right. Other comments, questions? Okay, question 4. How old was Abram when he first received these promises? Approximately. About 75, right? About 75 years old. When you look back at the text of Genesis 12:4, so Abram departed as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him, and Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Okay, not when he was first maybe called out of Ur of Chaldees, but when he departed Haran to come down to Canaan, the land of Canaan, he was 75. Now, how old was how old was he, Abraham, when Isaac was born? When we go to Genesis 21:5, 100. Now, you know why I'm bringing that up? I mean, I'm getting to this, next two questions, but he's 75 years old. He dies when he's 175. But he's 75 years old when he receives these promises, leaves Haran, goes to the land of Canaan. 25 years pass in his life before he even has this all-important son, Isaac, right? Think about that. I'm going to make of you a great nation. He doesn't even have a child. He doesn't have a son yet. And he's not going to for another 25 years. And that's not a great nation yet. That's just a son, right? But that's key to eventually having a great nation, right? To get to Isaac, to get to Jacob, to get the 12 sons, to get to the 12 tribes. But did Abraham physically, with his own eyes, see any of God's three promises fulfilled? Physically? Now, by faith, he did. But he didn't physically inherit all the land of Canaan and dispossess the Canaanites. That didn't happen. He didn't physically see all of this nation come from him, right? He lived to certainly see Isaac and et cetera for a little while, but and certainly Christ coming and dying and being a blessing and bringing salvation, he didn't see that physically. By faith he did, though. So what can we learn and apply regarding God's promises to us maybe from this story? What are some things? Francis?
Let's face it, God doesn't lie, and if He promises, it will come.
Yeah, so God's promises, when He promises something, doesn't mean it's just going to happen right then, right? For one, it's not going to necessarily be immediate. We think of promises, we think naturally, I think of something future yet to come, but one of the things that we know about God's nature is what Francis just said. It's impossible for God to lie, right? Titus 1:2 says that. Hebrews chapter 6, 17 through 19 emphasizes that truth. God cannot lie. So if He's made a promise, He's faithful to keep those promises. What else we might apply? Anything else you think of? Yeah?
God's time is like, what's the quote? The day is 1,000 years, or 1,000 years is a day. I mean, time doesn't really, God's not on His time, so.
That's right. As we go through the story of Abraham, he's going to bring up, you haven't given me a descendant yet. You keep making these promises, God, and he says, well, go out of your tent, like in Genesis 15. We read a little bit there this morning. He says, look up at the stars. Can you count them all? That's how numerous your descendants will be. And it says, Abraham believed God, and God accounted it to him for righteousness. Just look up there. Isn't that amazing? There's the evidence I'll provide right now. Your descendants are going to be more numerous than the stars of the heavens. But the time aspect, we're used to a beginning and an end. We're dealing with God who's eternal, His perspective is. And so a day is 1,000 years. 1,000 years is one day, as Peter says there in 2 Peter 3. All right. So timing as well. We need to keep that in mind. In God's timing, we want things kind of right now, right away. We got to trust in His will, in His ways. Anything else when you think of question 4? Ken?
I did a short lesson on that just recently when I spoke about waiting on the Lord.
That's right.
Abraham certainly waited 25 years for Isaac to be born.
Just get Isaac, right?
He had to have great faith.
So I cite these two passages in Hebrews 11, 9 through 10, Hebrews 11, 12 through 16, and Abraham and Sarah are in the context there, and I think overall broader picture of the men and women of faith of old. But when you look at those verses there, another lesson is to live by faith is what? What were they? How did they view themselves upon this earth? Strangers and pilgrims. In other words, as we sometimes sing, this world is not my home. But that mindset, that perspective is so key, and they had that. They lived by faith as strangers and pilgrims, trusted in God with full confidence that He will keep His promises, and that they died in faith, the Hebrew writer said, not having received the promise, but seeing them afar off. And they were seeking what? They weren't seeking Ur of Chaldees or Haran. They were seeking what, the Hebrew writer says? That heavenly country. That's where they were focused on going. Even back here, yes, even back here, a long time before Christ came, these great men and women of faith were living that kind of life, these saints of old. Todd?
Yeah, it mentions there in Hebrews that he dwelt in tents with Isaac and Jacob. It's like you need to recognize that, yeah, there's this big, lofty promise, but your part in it may be very small. He's dwelling in the tent. He's not owning this land. Even his grandson's not owning this land. But he's being faithful, serving God, and later on, there could be great blessings.
That's right.
Okay, thank you all. And now we're going to have to pick it up. I'm putting my foot in the gas right now. What is the significance of the Lord telling Abram, verse 3, first part of it in Genesis 12, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And is there any application of this assurance to children of God today? So what did that statement, what should it have said to Abraham? I'm with you, I'm in your corner, I'm going to protect you, I'm your rock, I'm your refuge, I'm your fortress, I'm your protection. And anybody who comes at you is basically coming at me, and they're going to be cursed. Anybody that's good to you, well, I'm going to be good to them, I'll bless them. Now, when I think about that, we may not have those exact words said to us, but when it comes to God's faithful saints, doesn't He bless us? Doesn't He promise never to leave us nor forsake us? Isn't He still our rock, our refuge, our fortress? And isn't He one day going to take vengeance on His enemies and the enemies of the cross of Christ and the enemies of the followers of Christ? We even had that in the book of Revelation, those who have been martyred for Christ crying out, how long, how long? And it's coming, it's coming. God will take care of it. And so He should have taken great comfort and confidence in that, and I think we should as well today. Number 6, what do we learn about Abram from what we read here in Genesis 12, verse 7, 8, chapter 13, 4, and 18? And then what application to ourselves can and should we make? So what do we see consistently through those verses if you look at them? Maybe some of you haven't, of course, if you're visiting, had the opportunity to even look at those, but if you glance at those real quick in your Bibles, what do you keep seeing repeated over and over? What's he doing in those verses? He's worshiping God, right? He's setting up an altar to the Lord. And sometimes he's returning to a place that he had done that and doing it again. But it's as you read, it's like when he comes to a new place to dwell, however long, briefly or a little longer, the first thing he's doing, I'm going to worship God, right? What can we learn from that and apply to ourselves? What should be a priority in our life? Wherever we go, wherever we're traveling, work, vacation, life, where we put down roots, priority should always be God, right? Seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, Matthew 6:33, not forsaking the assembly of ourselves together as the manner of some, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching, Hebrews 10:25. Worshiping God should be the priority in our hearts and our lives, and it shouldn't be a drudgery. Oh, what a weariness, Malachi 1:13, but a gladness to go to the house of the Lord to worship with the people of God, right? And question 7, what important lessons can we learn from the faith that Abraham possessed as we serve God today? When you look at what we've read in Genesis 12 and Hebrews 11, what can we apply to our lives?
Okay.
Obedient act of faith?
What was the last thing you said?
He acted on what was promised or what he was told to do. He
Okay.
immediately acted, and then, he was denying others and other things, and always putting God first.
All right.
So, kind of going back to the discussion we had about God's call to him and what Sam was saying, Eric is saying, Norm P. and all that conversation, did he have all the information up front? No. And yes, God has given us all things that pertain to life and godliness, but it doesn't mean we still don't have questions and don't understand everything in front of us. We accept it by faith. We have what we need to know. Abraham had what he needed to know, and he acted upon it, right? And so sometimes, there's going to be times in life we're going to, of course, have to always be willing to obey God in faith, even when it involves not having all the information, involves sacrificing physical comforts and family or other things. Get out of your own country, away from your family, and of course, turning away from things that we shouldn't have in our life, such as the idolatrous background that he came from. And you look at these passages of Mark 8, Luke 14, what's being emphasized? We must be willing to deny ourselves, suffer for Christ, follow Christ, that Christ comes before family. Luke 14, 25 through 33, it comes before me, self, our own comforts. We must give him our total commitment, forsake all for Christ, verse 33. And as we have no seconds remaining, I want you to draw and label Abram's route from Ur to Haran and then on to Shechem in the land of Canaan. So we're going to look at that real quick on our map and come back to it next week. But here's Ur of the Chaldees. He's told to leave, and they travel, and most likely this is the path they would have taken, but up to Haran, Padan Aram, and then eventually came down this path to, here's Shechem down in the land of Canaan. Okay, so we'll do some more map work as we go along, and we appreciate everybody being here. Your good comments today. Those who will be back next week, grab lesson 8, please, in the folders back in the front of the building. Thank you.